Okay. All right, well, I'm going to start out here. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Tara Bailey, and I am the founder of Vote Madison. We are a nonprofit based here in Madison, Alabama, with a mission to increase civic engagement in our community. This evening, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. David Hill, who will be presenting an additional perspective on the topic of whether Madison should switch to a council manager form of government. As an organization, we are not taking a position on this issue. However, we are committed to providing events that help to facilitate further discussion and understanding around this important topic. I will now turn things over to Jocelyn Brower to introduce Dr. David Hill.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Jocelyn Brower. I'm a volunteer with I Am Madison. It is the Citizens Coalition arm of I Vote Madison. We are made up of citizens in Madison who all share a desire to learn more about our local government and how it works, the decisions being made in our city, and how we can be a part of influencing those decisions. We've spoken at council meetings, we've emailed our council members and mayor, we have researched issues and have reached out to others who are informed and educated to get different perspectives and input. We are active and involved in our local government decisions and feel it is our responsibility to ask for transparency and hold our elected officials accountable. I ask that everyone here tonight be respectful of our speaker. He was invited here tonight. He did not reach out to us and is well qualified to add to the conversation and discussion regarding a possible change of government here in Madison City. He is not connected to our city and has no skin in the game, so to speak. I'm going to go ahead and read his bio. Then Dr. Hill will give a brief introduction to the topic, and we'll continue with a question and answer type of format. I have several questions we'll begin with. Please type your questions into the chat, and Tara will make sure they are asked. You may raise your hand during the discussion to have a question clarified, or if it leads to another relevant question. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this bio. Since 1988, Dr. David Hill has been the director of a firm that provides research and consulting services to governments, associations, corporations, and not-for-profit organizations. He has consulted with more than 100 cities, counties, and school districts across the nation, most often in Colorado, Texas, and Florida. He specializes in initiative and referendum campaign consulting at the state and local levels. In 2019, Hill was appointed to a fellow in the Center for the Political Future at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. He's previously taught at Stanford, Florida, Texas A&M, Auburn, Loyola, Baltimore, Florida Atlantic, and Kansas State. While living in College Station, Texas, David Hill served as a chairman of the Parks Board and as member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. In Auburn, he ran for mayor in 2018, making the runoff from a field of 8 candidates, and then garnering 47% of the votes in that runoff. He campaigned for curbing runaway development and for stronger commercial development standards, especially for parking, setbacks, and building height, and for protecting residential neighborhoods. Hill received his PhD in government from the Florida State University in 1975. His graduate studies included the prestigious methodology training program at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. David, I'm going to give you a couple minutes just to go ahead and introduce yourself and maybe give us a little background about the different forms of government.
Okay. As Jocelyn said, I hope you don't hate me after that long introduction. I always tell people, don't let them read a long introduction, and we broke our own rules there. I'm going to approach the topic from 3 different perspectives. One is, for many years, I have taught courses in state and local government. Just this past fall, I was a lecturer for a semester-long course in state and local government at Auburn, and so got to brush up against some of Alabama, which I'm going to tell you, I know much less about Alabama than I do some states on some of these topics, even though there's clearly overlap among the 50 states. I also, as you mentioned, I've served in local government in College Station, which was a fast growing community. College Station, Texas very much like Madison, very much like the Auburn and Opelika are today. I served in local government. She sat on Parks Board and Planning and Zoning Commission. I was also on a appraisal review board. So I kind of bring that hands-on perspective. And then finally, as a consultant, I think it's this where I particularly sort of experience some of the kind of choices you're going to have to make, and that I've had to work with a lot of local governments that have different approaches organizationally to administering their city. The basic kind of local government we started out, there's a few places in the country that have town meetings, and in New England, for example, they actually, the whole town is invited to come to the meeting. What a wonderful idea. And maybe 100 people gather at the general store and they discuss what the needs of the community are and make a budget. But that's rare. Most people have a mayor and a council. And usually these are divided into two categories. One would be a weak mayor council, where the mayor is pretty much just another member of the council. He has one vote like every other council member, but has certain kind of honorific responsibilities, kissing babies, cutting ribbons at the opening of new businesses, and maybe representing the city at official meetings of city officials. And so it's a very limited job, but important nonetheless. Then there's the strong mayor. The strong mayor is almost like, you can, probably the best way I would try to explain to students, it's like a little president. The strong mayor runs the city, as it were. He's the CEO, the chief administrator, and he appoints people to head departments and so forth. Those two categories, just in general, the pattern in the United States has been that weak mayor council tend to be in smaller communities, and by smaller, I would say under 100,000, just in general as a rule of thumb. And then strong mayor tended to be larger cities. Now, why is that? What the general understanding, the thought is that a community becomes larger, it's over 100,000 population. There's more politics, there's more issues that are conflictual in a community. There's more topics about which coalitions form, for and against. And the idea is that by having a strong mayor, whether this works or not, the idea is that by having strong political leadership, that you focus on electing someone every 4 years typically, that you have a chance to, through the mayoral process, to weigh in on those big and important issues in an effective manner. Now, that's sort of going back that prior to the turn of the century, until beginning the 20th century, in the early 1900s, we kind of felt like neither the small mayor, weak mayor, strong mayor system necessarily was professional enough. We had this sort of emergence of things like, in colleges, we'd have the Department of Public Administration. And the idea was that administration, running a government, is a professional activity, just like being a lawyer or a doctor, even an electrician or a plumber. They have certain sort of professional standards that they have to adhere to. And so there was a reform movement. The reform movement idea, and it affected lots of parts of government, not just local government, but they introduced this idea of professional administration. And that came to pass in two different ways. Some places went to a commission form of government. I was interested to see in some of the material that you had a commission form of government up until, I believe it was 1988 on the timeline that I saw. That's very rare in American communities to as late as 88 be doing the commission. Sometimes the commission was almost just like a small council, but sometimes when this sort of professionalization idea was that you would have one commissioner that was, say, the public safety commissioner. You might have one commissioner who was the public works commissioner. You might have another who was the human relations commissioner. And so each commissioner was a professional in their area, and then they sort of came together to vote on things where they had to sort of referee among their different interests. But the idea was to encourage professional administration. The other that came along in the 20th century was the city manager concept. And that was that we would add a city manager into a like weak mayor council system, whereas a weak mayor council might not be particularly adept at administering the city. We would introduce professional norms and values by having the council appoint a city manager to help them run the city. Important point there. The city manager was always understood in American local governance to serve at the pleasure of the council. That is, that person is hired by the council. They operate perhaps under an employment contract, not always, but usually. They negotiate, the manager negotiates with the council, determine things like their salary and the authority that they'll have as manager, how they referee administrative conflicts within the system. Say if public works and public safety disagree about something, the council sets certain boundaries through the authority and power of the manager. It was never intended that the manager would be a political individual. The idea was that the manager was a trained professional. He'd gone somewhere, gotten a master's of public administration, had perhaps worked in local government in a department or two, and sort of rounded out their resume, and then would bring that professional experience. But they're not yet, it's not being political, trying to be professional, not political, the opposite of that. And so, as with many things, it hadn't really turned out exactly that way. What's happened is in many instances, the office of city manager, not always, but in many instances, it's become politicized. And in some communities, the city manager may think of himself or herself almost as a political actor in the communities. That is, they don't view their role as being just to technically and value-free administer the wishes of the council. They almost view themselves as a mayor, a sort of maybe even super mayor who's over all these departments, and that they're administrating in a political way. Now, that's not always the case. Some people kind of hew that traditional progressive reform process of trying to be just a professional, not trying to be a political. So here's the main takeaway that I'm going to sort of give you this is, even though we have these buckets of categories, we have a strong mayor, weak mayor, we have council manager, we have commission, we have town meetings, whatever. At the end of the day, what's important are the people. I gave this example to someone thinking about this. Since, Roosevelt's time, let's say, or we can even go back further, we have many different presidents. In your lifetime, there have probably been 8 or more presidents. And each one was very different. They had essentially the same powers, but how they used those powers and chose to operate as a president was vastly different. Some were aggressive, more trying to exert control over pretty much everything, even the Congress. Others are more passive in how they approach it. And so the same is true of mayors and council and city managers. You're going to find, even though the label on the door may say weak mayor manager system of government, you may find that when you look closer there, you see that the manager is almost operating like a super mayor, a very political actor in the community. Or they may step back from that and just try to be simply an administrator, a implementer of whatever the council is doing. And, why is that? Well, just different situations demand different levels. Remember, I said the reason we had strong mayor is because we think there's a greater political need to coalesce decision-making in the community. You had to have some sort of focal point of leadership to move forward. And so in some committees, maybe the manager becomes more political because he or she is responding to specific needs they perceive in the community. But this can become conflictual. It's sort of interesting, even if you go around the country, when I meet with councils, often to present the results of a survey that is on some topic the city's interested in, you see some city councils, the manager actually runs the council meeting, even though they have a mayor. Sometimes it's an assistant city manager that's for council that runs the meeting. Sometimes it's the mayor that runs the meeting. Sometimes they may have a mayor pro tem, which is just a person who's taken on the role of kind of running the internals of a council meeting. So even though we have just a handful of different models of local government, in actuality, they're different in how they're implemented. And I would say the number one factor there is personality. Some people just naturally love power and want to accumulate more power, and they want to control things. Other people are like, delegators, or there are people that want to help not control power, but try to work toward a resolution between various competing interests they see in a community. So personalities make a difference. I do think the context of what your community needs at a particular point is going to be important. The more change, maybe the more political leadership that you need. So I'll just sort of stop there. And I know there are questions you have that are more apropos to your own situation in Madison. I'll try to answer those as best I can.
Well, I just had a couple first. So do you think one works better than the other, or does it just depend on who is put in those positions?
It depends on the people. I come back to the people. I mean, I've seen communities where I think they really needed a city manager, but maybe the process might have resulted in a choice of a manager who was not really effective for what that community's particular need at that point. I mean, frankly, sometimes a community in one decade needs one kind of political leadership, and in another decade, as it grows, matures in the community, they need a different kind of leadership. And so I don't know that I would say one is better or worse. I love the idea, the progressive idea behind public administration and value-free, administratively neutral leadership of community by someone who's trained to do this professionally. But frankly, running a city can never be the same as being a plumber or an electrician. There's not a code that's quite that clear. And but I like the idea. I probably changed on this over the years. I used to turn my nose up at the strong mayor council. I grew up in an age where you had like mayors like Mayor Daley in Chicago that wielded power in such a way that, it was almost authoritarian. New York's had some sort of famous mayors, Mayor Yorty out in Los Angeles, strong mayors in big cities. But I do think that as much at this point in time as ever, there is some advantage in having a strong mayor to help coalesce political forces. Now I'm going to go back to one other point. I would say, what's better? Maybe a key factor rather than the type is for you as citizens, I want the system that's going to allow me the greatest leverage and control over decision making. The one downside to the manager council system, the manager may start feeling like, well, I'm not really responsive to voters because I'm not elected. I'm just appointed. As long as I'm satisfying my constituents or the council members, it doesn't really matter whether I'm responsive to the public. In fact, some notions of professionalization might say you shouldn't pay attention to the public. They're knuckleheads. I mean, they don't know what they're doing sometimes. You can't trust the public. And they're taught that in public administration courses, they like, you let the people get too much control, then you're in trouble. So I would, from your perspective, sort of seeing what system is going to give me and my fellow voters the greatest leverage over decisions, whether made by a mayor or a manager, and clearly a strong mayor in particular, and it is going to give you a chance every 4 years to weigh in on things and either point the city in a new direction or not, the status quo or change direction. Sometimes city managers sign a contract for a 10-year term. Now that might be terminated. They're like football coaches. You can get rid of them early sometimes. But I don't know that I would feel comfortable with a system where I, as a voter, might lose any control or input for a decade.
How hard is it to remove a city manager, and have you seen it happen before?
Yes, I've seen it happen. It's somewhat sort of school superintendents. These can be bloody battles. But remember, the council hired the city manager. So they, in some ways, are going to be reluctant sometimes to admit defeat. Like, we made a mistake. Oops, we picked the wrong person. So sometimes they're going to, arch their backs. Now, there can be new elections, and I've seen elections where the election was over. Do we need a new city manager? When I ran for mayor of Auburn, I was very much for appointing a new manager. I just said I felt like we needed, and I was not against the current city manager, but I felt what I saw in Auburn was a repeated pattern where they never went out and did a national search. They didn't even do a statewide search. Every single time for the last 3 or 4 managers, we've promoted someone internally from an department, the Parks Department, Finance Department, Public Works Department. They get moved up to be manager. And I think that's because they're safe. But like, our current city manager was the highest paid city managers in the state of Alabama, and she'd never been a city manager in any other city. She had never, as far as I know, worked in any other city besides Auburn. My argument is that by opening up the process of selection and having like a national search and getting the public involved, just like when you select a new school superintendent, you have people get involved. I thought that would be an improvement, but there are a lot of people in Auburn that are afraid of change, and they don't want to bring in somebody from outside because they might rock a few votes. And so, again, you want to, yes, managers are sometimes run off, but it's bloody and tough.
Okay, so then and we did have, we were involved in the decisions for our last chief of police. We were able to see the interviews, we gave input as citizens. What type of things would you recommend that we ask for in our council if they go to do a search? You said one of them is to do more of a state or national wide.
Yes, there are firms out there, search firms, like just so there's search firms in other kind of business and corporate areas. There are search firms that specialize in like city management. And so I would try to retain one of those. There are several of these. You might even want to review their sort of record and history of success or failure and helping work with cities to identify a suitable city manager candidate. And then I would insist on there being some minimum number of candidates, at least 3. And should they allow someone internal? Sure, they should be able to compete. But the process should be opened up where you have maybe at least 1 internal candidate and 3 external candidates, and then they should be publicly interviewed. I've seen that. Now, one problem that you run into is sometimes people will say that are candidates, well, I don't want to let the people in my home community know that I'm interviewing. I'm wanting to date somebody else. I would say, well, then you're not going to be a candidate. I would say they have to come to Madison. They have to appear in some open forum, let you ask questions. You need to see their whole resume and whatever. And then you need to be able to weigh in. Does that mean you're going to vote on it or can't? No, But you should feel as citizens that you are part of the process of selecting that city manager. And frankly, the city manager should want that, because his credibility and legitimacy to lead the community forward will be enhanced if he was selected in an open process. If he's selected in some backroom secretive deal, well, then the first time a problem comes up, you're going to say, well, we didn't pick you. You're not our guy. We didn't, you were picked in some back room with a bunch of, old fogies in the community. And so I think progressive, smart city administrators would want to be selected in such a fashion.
Okay, that helps a lot, because I do know that a lot of citizens are concerned that after all this effort and all that we do here with a special election, we'll just end up with someone that we already have a city administrator. I mean, those are some worries. We'll just end up with the same people we have now. But
Right.
I mean, that's our job as citizens to, push our local government and our council, for some other options.
Let me just mention one thing too, to be sensitive to. You mentioned that I got 47% of the vote in a runoff for mayor. Well, actually, I won among people who were not city employees. Almost every city employee voted against me, because I was saying, we're going to open this process up. Next time we pick a police chief, we're going to have a search. We're not going to just promote the number 2 guy after the number 1 guy. Or next time we get a new finance department, we're going to support the number 2 finance person up to the top. And that was just, oh my goodness, Lord. It was like I had proposed that we raise taxes every year. It was just the idea that you were going to have some openness in the process. And I'm all for, if somebody's experienced and Cracker Jack, wonderful. But if you inbreed too much, it's why, like, for instance, college universities don't allow people to keep hiring their own PhDs to be the faculty, because then you become inbred. And I think cities sometimes become inbred by doing all their hiring from within.
Okay, and one more, and then we'll take some other questions. You did mention that you did have an experience with a city manager who was very type authoritarian.
Yes.
What are some red flags for that going through?
Well, this person, you didn't really have to look very far. If you sort of challenged him on anything, he would tell you he was running this city of Auburn, and he's a couple of city managers back and finally went off to California. But he was very, I think people were kind of ready to see him go because he just became full of himself and kind of felt like he was the mayor. Certainly in a weak mayor council system, he was the permanent force. He had been there a long time in other departments. He was another one of these people that was reported was promoted from within. And so it goes back to personality. You can talk to a personality and find out whether they think they know everything or whether they're the kind of person that says, like, they want to be collegial. They want to hear from different people. They're open to new ideas. And so those would be the kind of areas I would program, because I think people who are authoritarian and are just control freaks, usually it's pretty easy to figure that out.
Tara, do we have any questions from our attendees here?
Yes, we do. We have a few questions coming in. So I will start with Peter Kruger. He asks, it sounds like over time, as cities grow, they transition to strong mayor. Why would a growing city be advocating for a city manager?
Well, it sounds like this could be something that is less kind of like common sense, what you're doing there by sort of most norms. It may just be a byproduct of your current situation. Maybe people want out of the current city manager management system or something, so they think, no, we'll go to a city manager. It's unclear to me. The other thing they could be doing is that it's more common. in the kind of size that you are, that more cities have city managers. So conventional practice might be, I've seen some of the things in Madison, they sort of like, all the other cool kids are doing it, so why don't we do it? But you know how style goes. Sometimes it doesn't work out. But I mean, it can be a wonderful, I don't want to sort of talk it down. It can be wonderful depending on the people involved in the process.
Okay, we have another question from Terry Johnson. She says, Dr. Hill, what kinds of provisions should be in a city manager's contract that ensures their behavior is professional rather than political?
Well, interesting question. First off, I think that it should be, some kind of mechanism for, if it's not unusual for these people to sign like 10-year contracts. And if I were king in a situation like this, I would ask for periodic reviews, just as you do with a regular employee, where the council and perhaps even the community gets to have a heart-to-heart session, open session with the manager on an annual or semi-annual, on every biannual, every 2-year basis. I think it'd be more than once a year would be too much. So I think it's got to be extra clear to everyone that they serve at the pleasure of the council, and perhaps you might even have some way that if the manager does not enjoy support in sort of a test support vote of like some super majority number of the council, that you could terminate their contract even earlier for just the cause of not keeping the council's support. Some cities I've seen, they take these contracts out. They say, well, we can't fire him. He's got a contract. I heard that in Auburn when I would bring it up. I thought we needed to do council member. Fortunately, the fellow that I was talking about retired. But they'll say he's got a contract. I would say, yeah, but like in Auburn, Alabama, of all places, we know that contracts can be broken. We break contracts with football coaches all the time. We're the king of contract breaking. And so somehow you have to have kind of an understanding that let me go back to the first part. Most of the problems can be solved at the hiring process, at the intake. You hire the right person, you're going to have good results. But if you hire somebody that there's division on, and there's suspicion that this person is not really responsive to the citizenry, well, then you're gonna, year 2, year 3, this person starts showing sort of authoritarian, like my way or the highway kind of attitudes, and then it's much tougher. So yes, contract needs to have more off-ramps. Let's put it that way, off-ramps and reviews during the process. But get it right in the beginning, and those will be less important.
Great. We have another question from Jeff North. He says, one argument is that a newly elected mayor faces a massive learning curve and spends a lot of time just learning what is going on. In contrast, a city manager would give a degree of consistency and stability. How do you see it? Precisely.
I mean, that's the whole idea, that they're not only, it doesn't mean they're experienced. Look, I've taught in public administration programs. I've had people graduate with master's degrees that I taught that I wouldn't trust to mow my lawn. I mean, they just just because you get an MPA degree doesn't mean that you would know how to administer a complex political system like the city of Madison. But if you do get somebody who has, for example, say you found somebody who's twice before been manager in fast growing, medium to large size communities like yours, well, then that would give you some assurance this person does have some experience. Now, it's going back to, I don't think it's the end of the world. We let people president all the time that really haven't had any experience being president. And there's some learning. Yes, there is some learning. But presumably in the process of electing someone, sorting through the various candidates, you find someone that has the potential to learn the ropes and do it. Now, part of that might be, one thing that's very important, I think, is to have a healthy political process where council members serve in their wards or precincts or whatever, how they're elected, and maybe at large positions. And then at some point after a couple of years, they're ready to move up and run for mayor. And so I don't think that it means that just because somebody is elected mayor means that they're not going to know enough or not be able to learn enough. In systems like this, they can hire an administrator, but at least you know that the shots are being called by somebody who enjoys the support of a majority of voters. And I think that's important.
Great. So we have former Mayor Sandy Kirkendall making a comment here. Based on my experience as a mayor and on city commissions, the big downside of the strong mayor form of government is that elections are popularity contests, not a process for choosing a good manager.
Well, that may be your experience. And again, what I said is the strongest notion behind strong mayor is that there are tough decisions to be made. The reason we're having this discussion tonight is Madison's facing a complex decision. And so as a political scientist, I'll look at this and say, well, we have to figure out ways to help us sort through all this and get it done. Part of it is like groups like yours. You form groups, you sort of nurture the process of developing points of view about this. And at some point, yes, there's going to be a political process. I don't think it just means that it's a popularity contest. Maybe it has been in the past, but I think you're at a point in time where people realize this is serious business. We've got to elect somebody who knows what they're doing. Let me give you an example. So Auburn and Opelika, twin cities, right side by side. Auburn has a council manager system. We've had supposedly professional managers for decades now, and Opelika has a strong mayor system. And let me just tell you, they run circles around us. I mean, their economic development plans, they're working with the business community. They're just on every measure. I mean, some people already get mad when I say this, when it's true. It's hard for me to say this. The little Opelika, I grew up in Auburn. I thought, like, Opelika, it's like a mill town. You know, how could they be? Well, they've got a competent mayor, and I don't know all of his history, but I think he came through the council process. He's not going to be there forever. I will say this. I would worry about Opelika. This guy is so good, their mayor, he's going to be hard to replace. And he's supposedly sent word out that he's not going to run for re-election again. So it's troublesome, but I would say the system has worked for Opelika. Let's see what happens if they, they can't find a strong leader. Maybe they're going to punt and go back to some kind of a manager system like Auburn's got. But it's not so much, going to a point I make it over, it's not the system, it's the people, it's the personalities, it's the political talent. And, one thing I would say, here's an example that happens in a lot of bigger communities. They have a leadership program. I'm sure there's a leadership program in Huntsville, there may be one. And so they start nurturing young business, young attorneys, young, professionals at an early age, and they run them through usually a group of 12 a year. And it's like they make them go to council meetings, they make them, do papers about. So anyway, they're building in those communities a bench of future political leaders. I've seen this, Orlando, Central Florida has a wonderful system like this. And they can show over time, people who come out of the leadership system end up running for council, running for offices like mayor and so forth. And so maybe it's not from the system, but it's for you as a community to develop a process where it is more than a popularity contest, that you have a couple of candidates that have gone through the process, they've developed their leadership skills, they become more knowledgeable about how cities work. Usually these will visit other cities, come down to Auburn, go over to Decatur or Florence or something, and go around these different communities and see what's happening. And by the time you get to the age of 40 or something that you're thinking about running for office, even if you've not been on the council, you're going to have some leadership chops that will benefit the city.
Thank you. We have another question from Bryce Devine. In Alabama, is a weak mayor form of government popular with voters? We have examples of other cities who adopted this. Are there examples of cities that considered it and rejected it, and why?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a place where I've got a sort of a blind spot. Again, I would go back to, is the weak mayor, most people, like if I ask your average Alabamian, does your city have a strong mayor, a weak mayor, a manager council system? I'm telling you, I'd be surprised if 5%, 10% knew. It's just, some will know, sure, people like yourselves who, but I'm not giving our populace, our electorate a hard time here, but most people got better things to do than figure out what system of government they got. I teach students a whole semester and it's right in their textbook, and I tell them and they can't remember on their final exam the difference between a strong mayor and a weak mayor or manager. And they certainly, I know the kids I've always asked, last fall I asked it over, that none of them had any earthly idea what. So probably the answer is we wouldn't learn much from that.
Okay. Margie Daly asks, conflict in state constitution regarding we have a right to elect a mayor as CEO, city managers usurp this. I don't know if that's a question, but it's a comment. What do you
Well, you have a charter. Each community has a charter, and you have to select from a charter, and there's rules. I don't know immediately. I've looked at them before, but there's a process whereby you select which type of charter you want, and that would determine your form of government. Council manager, strong mayor council. And so it's part of your charter. And there's other things like being what's the name of it? Local. It's like a local control type. I can't remember the name that's used, but there are varying degrees. But your size city, it's going to be totally your own choice.
Okay, Terry Johnson says, as a professor of government, is there something unconstitutional about having a city manager?
No, it wouldn't be unconstitutional. It would just be, are you creating, we really don't, if you think about it, we've never adopted, this comes out of the progressive movement, as I said, the 1910, 1920, somewhere in there. It's when the progressive movement sort of rolled out in America. We've never really tried to adopt anything exactly like this for states, or certainly the United States government. Well, we're not going to say, well, we need to put somebody in charge of the United States that has a professional degree. Dr. Hill, he got a doctor, PhD. We're going to put him, well, that'd be the last guy they would want in charge. It's because we do believe that there's some virtue in the democratic political process, whereby we make decisions about the control of state government, national government, local government. And I do think that there's a danger that, I've just seen it firsthand, that and it even seems worse to me in the city management realm than it does in school superintendents. Almost all school superintendents really came through, not everyone, but most of them really come through the process. They were a teacher, they were a principal, they kind of move up they've had broad experience in my experience. Sometimes people get hired city manager that have relatively modest experience, and it's in just like one area. It's not, and all of a sudden, if you're running a big complex school district, my goodness, that's as hard as running a state. It's very challenging. And they're not prepared and they get in trouble.
Yeah, Margie adds to that, saying it's a conflict in the Constitution of Alabama in 11-43-82.
Okay. Well, it may be, but it's not been litigated because we have lots of city managers in Alabama.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions right now in the chat. Jocelyn, do you have any other questions? I think we have probably about 10 minutes or so left to wrap it up in about an hour.
I do, because in our last discussion, They made a point that the city manager can help with transparency. Do you have any insight into that?
You mean while they're serving as city manager?
Yes, they're saying as the city manager can be more transparent in ways. I'm not sure how that would apply.
Well, I think it might just be trying to tee out the idea that this is a more progressive, enlightened way of governance. It's not grimy like politics will be, you know, it's, but that just all goes, I've seen city managers that are just as political as Mayor Daley, as, you know, Mayor Giuliani of New York. I mean, I've seen managers just operate in a ruthless political fashion. May not have been textbook how they were doing it, but so you've got somebody who's in a position where their political values and their professional values may conflict. By the way, the places I've seen the most abuse would be people that really didn't matriculate through several positions, hadn't been city manager several places. It's usually people that just came out the school of hard knocks, may not have even gotten a public administration degree. I've seen this where like they'll get a degree in finance and they'll get a job in the city government, the you know, accountant for the city government. Then they kind of move up to the head of accounts payable. Then they move up to, you know, auditing. And then you see another finance director, and then you see another city manager. Well, to me, that's the kind of person that may not appreciate the importance of transparency and being open and accountable, because they've always been kind of maybe cloistered in their process of governance. So I don't see any necessary benefit in terms of openness and transparency having an administrator. Maybe somebody could convince me of that, but to me, they're just another political operator with an MPA degree.
We do have a question in chat, Jocelyn. Jeff North asked, doesn't having both a city administrator and an elected mayor naturally cause confusion about roles and responsibilities and turf battles? There seems to be some benefit in having a single chief executive.
I would agree. You know, and certainly if you have a city administrator that's appointed by the mayor, well, then you know where the responsibility lies. If you've got a city manager that's appointed by a council, 9 people or something, well, then it gets very ambiguous. And even whether that person gets to stay on, it's like, who is their constituent? That's why I said, if I were trying to construct a contract, not that the manager would like it, but I would want some off ramps, some test of support votes every couple of years to make sure we're ready to keep moving forward with this individual as the chief administrator of the community. So there's greater clarity with what you've got now. Now, maybe the personalities are such that it's not working out that way. But if you think I'm going to create a system of having a manager, trust me, that doesn't necessarily, if you get the wrong people, hope I've said that enough, if you get the wrong people, it's not going to solve your problem.
Thank you. Peter Kruger says, what are examples of abuse that get city managers removed?
Where they get too close to political force in the community, let's say developers. Developers start taking them on trips to Las Vegas, to casinos in New Orleans. These are not hypothetical. And then the city manager leans on the planning director to grease the skids for every project. And so see, you've got this imprimatur of this value-free, apolitical administrator who's just administrating, and all of a sudden he's just boss hog politician. You know, so, you know, there maybe you've got to have a lot more ethical bumpers on sort of what a manager can or cannot do But you know, they can do things, say, well, I'm going on a trip to Las Vegas to study local governments in Rocky Mountain states. And you know, the trip gets paid for in some form or fashion or something, whether they're there by a developer. And all of a sudden, that administrator forgets everything he learned in his Master's of Public Administration program about the science of local government. He's become a political actor. So I think the temptations of the commerce side is probably the greatest.
Okay, we have a question from Thomas Cromer. If you fire the manager, there may be a long time before you get another. Is anyone in charge during that gap?
Yeah, most cities will have somebody who's like an interim. It might be somebody that's head of the public safety department, head of the public finance department. So yeah, just as in a lot of aspects of our lives, if you, you know, there's a vice president or there's a lieutenant governor. So there's going to be somebody who would be who is professionally trained. And that's why it's important to know who your department heads are too. And that they're selected. And it sounds like you had a very fine process on your public safety director. And so if that person might be fine to be an interim in addition to their other, or I've seen places where they'll take a retired city manager, comes out of retirement, to handle the job for 6 months or whatever year it takes to find a replacement. You have a town that is a community that is a gym. I mean, I think you could attract talent from all over this country that might want to be in a vibrant, growing community like Madison. And you know, particularly in some ways, they're going to be the first city manager, they're not burdened down by kind of a status quo. Here's how the manager works or whatever. It gives you an opportunity to be to sort of create an ideal model for future city managers. And that would appeal, I think, to some correct thinking city management types. There are some great city managers, don't get me wrong. I just think there are more bad ones than good ones.
Yeah, Margie asks, why is a special election required?
Well, as I said, each city government in every state, including Alabama, has to go through some process to choose its charter. Now, I don't know whether this is going to be considered a charter election where it's a whole new charter, or whether this is just an interim step where you say we won't have a manager, and then we would have to subsequently, perhaps it's even the council that makes the decision to ask for a change in charter, which goes to the legislature and which they would routinely approve. So there will be some process for your charter to be changed from your current strong mayor system.
Okay, Jocelyn, do you have any other questions? There's no more in chat at the moment.
There was just one more on the list regarding the League of Municipalities.
Mhm.
From our understanding is the league doesn't encourage city manager form of government, but they do provide some training. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And like Auburn has a public administration program. I'm sure there's something like that at the University of Alabama. Some of the other universities may have a program. I'm familiar with some of the programs that the League of Municipalities offer that are sort of professionalization programs. They have programs that, you know, teach people how to have a professional civil service at the local level, how to develop a series of job descriptions and proper compensation levels. They study compensation. I know the league does that sort of thing. So in terms of professionalization, going back to that word, trying to have a professional, not just wholly political process, the league would, that's interesting to me that they would say that they don't encourage the manager at all, because in some places, the fix is in for the city manager, former government, because some of the people that their whole life is being a city manager, they end up being influential with the League of Municipalities. And so then in turn, they encourage them to be pro-manager.
Okay, Any other questions before we wrap up here? It's almost 7:30. So we really appreciate you, Dr. Ho, coming on to our iVote Madison Zoom channel here and speaking with some of the residents. I think a lot of residents got a lot of questions answered that they've been having, and it just definitely offers this different perspective than some of the meetings that we've been having. And we just continue to put on events like this to help educate the public and have discussion around this topic, because it's a big topic. So yeah.
Terrific. I wish you the best of this process. As I said, your groups like yours are part of this political process I was talking about. Whoever's eventually elected mayor or manager is going to benefit from the sort of rich political activity and issue formation that's coming out of groups like yours.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Hill.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
There you go. Thank you. He's gone.